And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast to be exact. I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 30 of season 2, you guys know the deal. I have to talk to you guys about a few quick things. First off, if you are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you happen to like today's episode, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Also, just so you guys know, we just finished our player evaluation series and we broke down the statistics, graded each player on their performances in the 23-24 season. Up and down the roster, we took a look and deep dive at each and every player except the newest additions. So if you happened to miss that series, make sure to visit our YouTube profile, look in some of our past episodes, and make sure to check out those episodes and give them a look. It'll give you a great inside look at everything that happened with the Detroit Pistons season. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 30 of season 2. It's kind of crazy. We're already at episode number 30. That's just great. And some big news dropped this week, something that we can't help but talk about. This week's topic, we are going to tell you everything you need to know about Trajan Langdon, the newly hired president of basketball operations for the Detroit Pistons. Before getting into some of the nit and grit details of his past with former organizations, I kind of wanted to break down his bio so you guys know some of the little info about Trajan and his background. So he was born May 13th, 1976. He's an American basketball executive and former professional player. He was just recently with the New Orleans Pelicans, and he was a shooting guard, and he first gained his fame in the U.S. while playing with the college basketball team Duke University. And he was named assistant general manager of the Brooklyn Nets in 2016 and serving in that role until May 2019, when he was then named the general manager of the New Orleans Pelicans. And Ryan, when talking about Trajan's past, a big part of why he is now this president of player operations is because he really made a name for himself with the New Orleans Pelicans. Ryan, can you break down some of the moves he made with New Orleans and certain trades he made, certain draft picks, and how he really sculpted that roster into what it is today?
Yeah, so you look at, obviously started out his executive towards that career path with the San Antonio Spurs in 2012 under Greg Popovich, because Pop would have hired him because Pop is the executive and GM and coach of the Spurs. But then moves on, goes to Brooklyn as an assistant GM under a good group there, and then fast forward, then gets hired in New Orleans to be the new GM under David Griffin. David Griffin is a highly respected executive in the NBA, most notably known for his time with the Cleveland Cavaliers and building that team up to where LeBron's coming home and winning that championship. So the point being said is, like, Trajan Langdon has a lot of experience from a lot of great mentors in his career, from playing in college at Duke under Coach K, then going to San Antonio under Greg Popovich. And Brooklyn had some good pieces there in the front office role, no longer there, but some good pieces. And then New Orleans, obviously under David Griffin, highly respected. But you look at what he's done, and obviously you look at who he's brought in draft wise. As a scout with the Spurs, he's helped bring in Kyle Anderson, JaMychal Green, and Boban Marjanovic, one of our favorites.
Yeah.
Then with the Nets, helped bring in Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, two solid players. One of them, of course, Go Blue, and Karis LeVert. And then with the Pelicans, he's helped brought in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jackson Hayes, Zion Williamson, Kira Lewis, Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado, Herbert Jones, Trey Murphy, Dyson Daniels, and Jordan Hawkins. So pretty much the entire New Orleans Pelicans team today he's brought in via draft and trade. And there's, I'm not even going to go into all of the trades that he's done, but the first one he was a part of is sending out Anthony Davis to the Lakers. And of
Okay.
course, they get Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, DeAndre Hunter, Brandon Ingram, a couple firsts in cash. Like that was a big deal at that time because Anthony Davis no longer a New Orleans Pelican, now a Los Angeles Laker. And then that same year, they're trading away Jordan Bone, Solomon Hill, DeAndre Hunter, and a second to Atlanta, which you're going like, Ryan, that's not a game-changing trade. It is when you think of what they got in that trade, because they would have gotten Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jackson Hayes out of that deal. But then you fast forward a year later or so, there's the Drew Holiday trade. They're trading away Drew Holiday to the Bucks, and they trade away like a handful of players, and they get back Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams, which in turn, in 2021, trade them away again, but you trade away Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe to the Grizzlies, and then Wesley Awundu, cash, and a 22 first to the Hornets. But to bring it all in, you get Devontae Graham, solid point guard, solid role player in the NBA. Brandon Boston would have gotten shipped off after that trade happened to the Clippers, but they got Trey Murphy and Jonas Valanciunas, who are key players on their team. So the point being said, and also he did make the CJ McCollum trade, which is massive in itself too. The point being said with Trajan and what he's done as a GM, or even being within a front office role, between being a scout to an assistant GM to GM and now an executive with the Pistons, is he's been a part of a lot of major moves. David Griffin is the type where he's going to look to trade and draft. In Brooklyn, they look to trade, they look to draft. And then in San Antonio, they look to trade and they look to draft. These teams don't look for free agency as their destination to get high-end players. They look to draft and they look to trade. That's the bottom line. And so what we can expect out of Trajan Langdon is we're going to expect a guy that's going to trade and that's going to draft. And of course, who knows what's going to happen with Troy Weaver and staff, because Trajan has a different philosophy most likely than these guys have. I mean, Weaver has the tree of Sam Presti in Oklahoma City. And so like he has a knowledge in himself. But the point is, Trajan loves and has been around executives and other front office staff members where their philosophy is to draft and trade. And that's perfect for Detroit and what we're looking for, because small market teams were never able to sign high-end free agents, because who's going to come to Detroit, right? We could offer Paul George, as an example, a max contract this offseason. Do I want that? Absolutely not, because he's already late into his career. It'd be a waste of money. But the point is, like, even us throwing a max contract to Paul George right now, Paul George is not signing that deal because we are Detroit, Michigan. We're a small market team. We're never going to get one of those high-end players on a max contract unless we're at the point where it's like, yeah, we're legit. We're competing for a championship every single year, or we're at least competing for the Eastern Conference Finals every year. But Trajan Langdon is a guy who likes to draft and who likes to trade.
So we talked about his time as being an executive with the Pelicans, with the Nets, and so on. Now I kind of want to talk about how he got this basketball perspective and what really gave him a deep insight into what is professional basketball. And it was because he had himself a very interesting professional basketball career. Langdon was selected by the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers in 1999 NBA draft. Langdon made his professional debut with the Cavaliers on November 2nd, which why I'm saying that is because he was the first Alaskan player to be in the NBA. And then following a 3-year career with the Cavaliers, he moved to Europe to play for the Italian League in 2002, 2003. Following season, he was waived by the Los Angeles Clippers. And then you fast forward a couple seasons, and he plays very good. He was named to All Euro League first team in 2006, 2007. That feat then he repeated in between 2007, 2008 season. On May 4th of 2008, he was named the EuroLeague Final Four MVP after again winning the EuroLeague title. So he kind of had an interesting career going all over to Greek and to Russia, and having a couple good years in the NBA. And the reason I think, this is important to pick out is this guy has a deep understanding on not just US basketball, but he also has connections all across the world. And I think that's big, especially now that we're seeing a lot of overseas players coming to the NBA and dominating. And just like, sales is a business or so on and so forth, NBA is a business, and it's all in who you know. And Trajan has made a lot of great connections, not just with America people, but also all over the world. And I think that might add a fun little benefit to the Detroit Pistons, maybe an upper leg per se, because I think he's going to be able to get in contact with anybody all around the world. And I think that's going to add an interesting factor to the Detroit Pistons. Ryan, when looking at Trajan's career in the NBA and over professional, like what are some of the things that stands out to you? Because he had a very interesting career. He wasn't like a Monty Williams where he had long stints for many years. He was all over the world.
Yeah, so like obviously college All-American, consensus All-American. He really, I mean, he was amazing at Duke. He set the 3-point record before it ended up being beaten by JJ Redick. But like he's also known as the Alaskan Assassin, which it has to be one of the coolest nicknames ever. But
like that.
But man, he could shoot. He was a great guard at Duke. When you're getting recruited out of Alaska, of all places, by Coach K, you're legit, right? Obviously, NBA never really worked out, but it doesn't work out for everybody in the NBA. And we also have to keep in mind 1999, early 2000s NBA is completely different than a lot of and than basketball today. And then basketball, even you look back at the 70s, 80s, and then early 90s, even like though that era of basketball is completely different in how you shape a roster, and what goes into having a successful team, a non-successful team. The Cavaliers sucked during that time. Even honestly, their record wouldn't depict that they're worse than us, but honestly that team was almost as worse as we were, or as we are currently. But Trajan in college, stud, 3-point shooter, obviously doesn't translate in the NBA, but he's still a great player because he has a crap ton of success over in Europe. Europe, like now everybody's like, yeah, EuroLeague, it's not the NBA. It's not like anything spectacular. There's a lot of good players over in Europe that come over and play in the NBA. Luka Doncic was in the EuroLeague, and a cast of multiple other players have played in the EuroLeague that have come over to the NBA. The point is, EuroLeague is not a bad league. It's the second league outside of the NBA in terms of top tier talent, and so obviously didn't make a name for himself in the NBA because of injuries and such. Goes over to Europe and just balls out. Like he's a great player, and having those connections in Europe, there's been a lot of GMs and executives that have come up in the ranks the last couple of years that have certain connections to Europe that have really like developed their team into something because of those connections. And having that and understanding European basketball, but also having an understanding of American basketball, when you merge those two things, good things can only happen out of that. So I expect Trajan to be able to not only articulate and scout American players and all over here, but like also, okay, there's like Simone Fontecchio is a key example. He's Italian. Like obviously did not draft him, did not scout him.
Right.
But like those are key examples of guys that you just find out of the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they have success. Now, hopefully Trajan does not pull a Joe Dumars and draft a Darko Milicic. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But I think today is completely different because the technology we have and so on and so forth is far different than what Joe Dumars had in order to draft a guy like that. So with that being said, I think because of the connections in Europe and then what he's done between coming from Alaska, playing under Coach K, getting hired by Greg Popovich and David Griffin and others, he's going to be a well-established dude that can really take this team to the next level.
Before we talk about the positives and negatives of hiring Trajan, I wanted to talk about a funny little story I saw from online. It actually talks about how Langdon almost had a successful baseball career at the MLB level. Here's a quick little story. Quote, a baseball scout discovered Langdon playing catch with his father in the parking lot of their hotel during Langdon's recruiting trip to Duke and was immediately impressed. Langdon was selected in the 6th round of the 1994 Major League Baseball draft out of high school by the San Diego Padres. One thing to note is being drafted in the 6th round of the MLB is super impressive. I believe there's like I know there's for sure 14 rounds, so that's just super impressive. At the time, he was the highest drafted player ever out of Alaska, and he signed with the Padres and received a $230,000 signing bonus. But because of NCAA rules at that time, he was prevented to play from receiving a scholarship in one sport while playing another professionally. Langdon had to play basketball at Duke without a scholarship while playing minor league baseball during the summer. So while he's playing D1 college basketball, he's playing minor league baseball. In 3 seasons in the minors, he played in 50 games for the Spokane Indians and the Idaho Falls Braves. I just wanted to take note on that because that's super impressive. Ryan, do you think throughout the season we're going to get a clip of just Langdon throwing dots? I mean, we have to see a clip of this, right?
Maybe not. Who's to say? It was so long ago that who's going to look up Trajan Langdon baseball highlights? So, I mean, you can go and do that yourself, but like, I don't know if that's going to just surface out of nowhere, you know?
Dude, I think that's awesome. I'm just impressed. I mean, to play at a super high level at one sport while also playing another at a super high level, I just love it. So let's talk about the positives of hiring Trajan. You know, obviously we talked about his European connections and the experience all over the country. And then we talked about his great draft picks of the past and trades and getting Herb Jones in the 2nd round, a great steal, and the Trey Murphy. He traded up for Trey Murphy in that draft. But when talking about a positive, I want to bring up how many sources are reporting that Tom Gores has given Trajan the okay to make triggers on whatever decisions he wants to make. And we will get in depth talking about, you know, Monty Williams and how there's some rumors of maybe him getting fired, and also Troy Weaver. It seems like everyone's kind of sticking their necks out, but I think it's really cool to see Tom Gores, who obviously must have some trust issues just from coaches of the past, GMs of the past, and then to just stick his neck out and be like, Trajan, do what you got to do to make this team win. And I think that kind of speaks to Tom Gores and the decisions he's making. I don't know if he's being brash and quick to say things like this, or he's just willing to do whatever it takes. And I think Langdon isn't a quick trigger guy like a Troy Weaver is, you know, in free agency or trade talk. You know, Troy Weaver, we know, is willing to make any decision at a flick of a wrist, where Langdon, I think, seems a little bit more calculated, like the way we thought Troy Weaver was. But I think that kind of speaks to what we want as fans, is a guy that's very calculated, making moves that is going to work for franchise guys. We know a guy like Zion Williamson that doesn't focus on the defensive end, but rather trying to, you know, create shots on the offensive end, gets guys like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy that excel on the defensive end while also being able to get you 12 to 15 points a game. So I think that proves how Langdon seems very calculated in his decisions. When talking about positives and negatives about Trajan, what are some of your thoughts, Ryan?
Well, first off, on the Tom Gores bit there, I don't think it's Tom Gores going like, you know what, do whatever you think is going to make this team successful. Right. I think it's more so like he's going, crap, I really put us in a hole. I went out to try and get Troy Weaver myself. I went out to try and get Monty Williams myself, and now we suck. So clearly it's my fault. So I'm gonna give you this opportunity to make me look good, and here you go. I think that's what it is. I don't think it's necessarily that Tom Gores is going like, "Yep, I knew you were the right guy for the job this entire time, and that's why I'm gonna give you my entire team to just do whatever you want." I think it's like, I really shouldn't have done that or made Monty Williams the highest paid coach in NBA history. I really shouldn't have done that. So here you go. Fix my problems, please. I think that's what it's more so like. But I think there are, like you said, Trajan is very calculated. He's been under guys, David Griffin, etc., that are very calculated. They only make certain decisions in certain situations. And Troy Weaver, what he's done trade wise, like he comes in and he trades pretty much our entire team away. And but the team that he's trading away, it's not like anything spectacular. He's trading guys like Trey Lyles and Kelly Olynyk and etc. And it's like, yeah, that we weren't really thrilled with those guys anyways. They had a good season, but it's like, who cares? And then the
Right.
guys he brings in, it's like almost he made the team worse. But then by doing trades in the draft, we're able to get Jalen Duren and others, and we're sitting there going like, holy crap, he might be a mastermind. But then it's just nothing's happened since. And normally, if he makes a trade at the deadline, it's like it's a good quality player, and that's about it. It's nothing spectacular. Or if he's making trades in the offseason, it's not like, again, not anything spectacular. It's just a good, solid role player. But this deadline, I think he had a lot of pressure on him from the media to the fans, just the entire front office, maybe Tom Gores breathing down his neck a little bit, going like, hey, you got to do something. You can't just sit back and relax. You got to do something. And because of that, I think we saw Bojan get moved out, Burks, Simone Fontecchio come in, Quentin Grimes come in, and all
Mhm.
those guys. So I think it was more so my job is on the line. I got to do something. Same thing
Yeah.
happened to Stan Van Gundy. His job was on the line. He trades away a bunch of assets and Luke Kennard and everybody to get Blake Griffin. And what happens? We're in a hole again. So maybe this doesn't put us in a hole. I don't think it does because Simone is a positive and Quentin Grimes is a positive. But that being said, I think Troy needs somebody above him to help him with this process because obviously this is a pretty hard job for almost anyone. I'm not saying being the GM of a team is easy. I'm not at all, but it's also very hard. It really is because you have to make the right decision at the right time. That like Sam Presti made note of that today in a press conference because it was a situation regarding Gordon Hayward. He makes the move at the trade deadline this past season to acquire Gordon Hayward, and he's sitting there going like, Gordon Hayward is a solid player, solid NBA vet. Obviously, not the same player he was before Boston, but he's still a good player that could add and take this team to the next level. Obviously, in the playoffs, plays 48 minutes and does nothing.
Right.
And Sam Presti is sitting there going, yep, that was a mistake on my part. I thought he would have been the right player at the right time, but the team we had in the first 20 games is completely different than the team that we had in the last 20 games in the playoffs. It was a completely different team, and there was no way of me seeing the growth of a certain player that's going to change the outcome of the whole team and how the style of play is. So obviously, it's a hard job. But I think Troy Weaver having somebody above him in Trajan Langdon here as an example is going to be good because Trajan's had David Griffin above him the last couple of years, last 5 years that he's been in New Orleans. David Griffin knows what to do in certain situations because he's a very smart guy, very smart executive. When he was with the Spurs early on as a scout, he had Pop, one of the greatest basketball minds to ever step foot in the NBA, knows exactly what he does day in and day out, takes calculated risks, but oftentimes it's not even a risk, it's more of a reward. So I think Trajan just being around Weaver will take Weaver possibly to the next level. And a lot of these moves going forward are going to be a lot more calculated than like, ooh, I think that could be a good player. I don't know, but let's just see. That's what Weaver's doing right now. With Trajan coming in, I think it's going to change, and that's going to be a big positive.
So when addressing Troy Weaver, like in my mind, we know that Troy has had 4 years with the Pistons. And I just look at it like I don't know if Troy Weaver's the kind of guy that wants somebody looking over his shoulder. We've seen what he did when he came right into the Pistons organization. He said, I'm the guy, I'm trading everybody away, and we're flipping this team. And a kind of guy that makes those decisions, I don't know if he likes having a shoulder, like a guy looking over his shoulder. So it's going to be interesting to see in the coming weeks what kind of relationship Trajan and Troy Weaver have. We're going to want to really look at that closely, because if we see that there's some distance, they're not taking press conferences together, they're not making quotes about each other in pressers or anything like that, we're going to want to see what happens there, because that might mean Langdon's going to make a move, and something drastic could happen. I'm not so convinced on that take, but I definitely want to keep a close eye on how these guys seem to be interacting, because we saw when Troy Weaver and Tom Gores brought in Monty Williams, how they really seemed to click right away, especially in the pressers and in quotes they made during article interviews and so on. We saw that they really liked each other. I kind of want to see how Troy Weaver reacts to this Trajan thing. Also, make sure to comment below your thoughts on positives for Trajan Langdon. We want to know what your guys' thoughts are. Also, let's talk about some of the negatives. I think when talking to negatives of hiring a new president of basketball operations, I think it's interesting that it's his first stint in this position. I think that just like a rookie coming in, yeah, he was a GM, but just like a rookie coming into the NBA, or a new player heading and signing with another team of free agency, there's going to be a lot of learning curve. And I think that it's going to be kind of interesting what happens through the draft, if what way the fans react to certain draft picks. It's going to be interesting to see what his first moves are. And when Troy Weaver came in, we were all pretty much thrilled with what was going on, just because it was so dark and terrible with the organization at that time, and we were really happy with those moves. Obviously, 4 years later, we're not at where we thought we would be, but I kind of want to watch and listen closely to these pressers from Trajan and see where his head is at. And I think everything's so new, so hopefully some of these questions will be answered very, very soon, especially as a worrisome fan. But Ryan, what are some of your first thoughts when talking about negatives on hiring a guy like Langdon? Where's your head at?
Honestly, to me, I really don't have any negatives. Just because like he's been a GM for 5 years. Before a GM, he was an assistant GM for 3 years. And then obviously as a scout, he's worked his way up. And he's been under a lot of great basketball minds, like I've noted multiple times during this episode. But he's been under a lot of great minds, most notably and most recently under David Griffin. And we also have to keep in mind on your note there that there's not a lot of teams that actually have a president of basketball operations.
Right.
There's not a lot of teams. Not every team has one. Like we've as the Pistons have sat here the last 5 or so years without one. We've only had a coach, a GM, and then obviously there's the owner. We haven't had a president of basketball ops. So obviously it's a little different because it really differs from team to team. Obviously with the Pelicans the last couple of years, you've had David Griffin. With the Nets, they never had one. They just had an assistant GM and a GM. And then obviously in San Antonio, there's no assistant GM. There's no GM. It's just Pop. Pop runs the show. And so it just depends on which situation you're in and which franchise you come out of, if they have one or not. So I don't think it's a negative for him being in that new role, because realistically, it's and president of basketball operations is not much different than a GM. It's pretty much the same position, just a little bit glorified in the sense that it's you and the owner, and then you can have a guy like Troy Weaver who can be handling more of your day-to-day operations, where you can just manage the overall picture, where Weaver can really get into the nit and grit details. Obviously, I'm not saying Langdon's not going to do that. I think he is, but it's one of those positions where is obviously a manager type role. There's always going to be a big boss, a bigger boss, and then the GM. And so obviously Langdon being the bigger boss here in this situation, not the big boss, but the bigger boss. Obviously, I don't think anything is going to change for job whatnot, just because being a GM for 5 years, being under David Griffin, I'm sure he was in a lot of the major conversations, because obviously you don't just hire a GM. Like, I'm sure David Griffin sitting there could have been like, yep, I'm going to run this team all by myself because I'm capable of doing that and I want to do that. If the Pelicans really wanted to, he could have done that, but he didn't. And so, with that being said, being along for the process of trading away Anthony Davis, trading away Drew Holiday, drafting Zion Williamson, drafting Jose Alvarado, etc., bringing all these guys in, I think it's not going to be any different than what he's experienced before. Obviously, I think there's going to be a little bit more pressure on him just because we haven't filled that position in 5 years. But I don't think there's any negatives around it. The only negatives are Troy Weaver, Monty Williams, and Tom Gores. Those are the 3 negatives right now. There's no pressure whatsoever in my eyes on Langdon. It's just those 3 guys, and Weaver and Monty and then Tom Gores. That's where the pressure is. It's not on Langdon. And then as far as you go with those 3 guys, what it looks like down the road, obviously Tom Gores is the owner. Not much change could go there. But I would suspect that Weaver is not going anywhere this season. Monty Williams is not going anywhere this season. There won't be a move in those 2 positions until potentially this upcoming offseason next year. That's the only time there will be movement, just because this will give Langdon a little bit of a buffer, because if he replaces them right now and it doesn't work out and it's just as bad of a season as it was last year, we're going to be in a situation where all eyes are going to be on Langdon. Clearly, he's not cut or fit for this job. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a buffer, and those guys are going to stay. But to me, no negatives for the most part.
That will do it for episode number 30 of season 2. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to comment below your thoughts on the new hire. And we will see you guys in episode number 31 of season 2. Peace.